Hello again, everyone. I am here today with another handmade book that I made with papers from a class called Died and Gone to Heaven by Liz Constable. And I was turned on to Liz Constable by Fodder School too. And I loved her method so much that I signed up for her class that she does separately on her own. There is some overlap between the two classes if you're thinking about doing one or the other, but I think they're at least so far I'm only I'm only in the first week of Died and Gone to Heaven. But even so, I've already learned some new tips and tricks and that sort of thing to dyeing papers. So that's been really fun. But I will put a link down below to Liz Constable's website. I'm not sure how often she offers this class. It seems to be kind of intermittent, and it's always live. So I don't think she has a recorded version, but just keep an eye out if you want to take it again. But then, of course, there's always the Fodder School 2 class that she teaches that is recorded, and I think they're still taking registration, and you can go ahead and get into that. And that has lots of fun stuff in it too. So I think either or both would be good. So I just made this with the papers. I'm not going to talk about how I made the papers because that's what the class is for, but I did want to show you how I put together this little book. And this is something that's really, really simple that you could do with any papers that you wanted. I think really the only criteria is that you have some thinner papers to go on the inside and a thicker paper to go on the outside. I use watercolor paper for this, and then a thinner sulfite paper for the inside pages. And they're actually quite thin. I probably could have gone a little thicker than that, but I sewed this little closure on to the back. It's just some ribbon. I seem to really like this particular ribbon. It's kind of a rust colored, vintagey looking ribbon. I think, where did I get that? I think I got it from Terrain when it was on sale after the holidays a couple years ago. But they off and on will have different colors of velvet ribbon. But you don't need to do this part at all. That's sort of an add-on. But you can just make a little pamphlet like this without the closure, and it'd be perfectly fine. And then this is put together with embroidery thread and what you call a pamphlet stitch. So if you don't know about any kind of bookbinding or putting together papers, basically this is just a one signature, meaning there's only one set of folded papers. This is a one signature notebook. So it's pretty much the easiest one you could make. So you just basically stack one page into another until you have as many as you want, or you have so many that you can't put anymore. Then you punch 3 holes in the spine of the thinner papers and the cover. And then I would recommend, if you're interested in putting together something with a pamphlet stitch, just Google pamphlet stitch, and it's pretty easy to do. You just need a blunt needle and any kind of thread that you want, or you don't have to use bookbinding thread, because I have not used that. I just used embroidery thread. That I did double it up so that it would be a little bit more sturdy, but even single, it'd probably be fine. But I did also want to go through the papers that are in here. But this is a really good way, if you have any papers that you've made. Watercolors are a little bit harder, because if you wanted to fit the whole thing with watercolor paper folded, it might end up being too thick pretty early. I mean, you might be able to do that with like 3 or 4 pieces of paper, but especially if it was a thinner watercolor paper. But this is more for, I would say, thinner weight papers. And then I've essentially made the cover out of a watercolor paper. But you could do this with any size papers. It's very adaptable. But it's a really great way if you've been creating a bunch of papers, like maybe playing around with things, mixed media or whatever, if you just don't know what to do with them, make them into a little notebook. And this is something that you could write in, or just leave it as eye candy. This one I made with lighter pages on the inside, so I probably will use it as a notebook, maybe sketch or journal in. But it's a really quick and easy way to make your own journal. And you could do this with blank pages too. You could just get blank paper that you like to write with and some thicker paper for the cover, leave it all blank, and then, you know, maybe just write something on the cover as your notebook. But it's a really nice way to use papers that you have. And because I've been dyeing all these papers in these classes, I have a lot of papers. So I'm going to go ahead and do a flip through now, which is what I was intending to do. But I thought it would be good for you to hear, you know, how you can make something like this really, really easily. You're basically just nesting pages together after they're folded, and then using a pamphlet stitch. And it really is easy. Even if you think you can't bind a book, you can probably do this. If you have a blunt needle and some thread, you're good to go. So, and you could use an embroidery needle if that's all you had. You don't necessarily need a bookbinding needle, but usually the bookbinding needles are a little more blunt at the end. They're not sharp. So you just be more careful if you're going to use an embroidery needle, because it might poke you. I am often poking myself with a sharp needle, no matter what I'm doing with a needle. Unfortunately, it just seems to be my curse. I'm not a fan of sewing, but I am, if you know what I mean. I like to sew, especially hand sewing. Hand sewing is more my speed than machine sewing, but it doesn't matter if it's hand sewing or machine sewing. I am sometime during that session, I'm going to poke myself with a needle. It's just like a given. I don't know if it's because I'm clumsy or what. But anyway, so here is the cover. And like I said, this is out of watercolor paper. This is not a super thick watercolor paper. I think that this might be the Canson XL paper. So this originally was in a larger sheet, and I cut it down for other things, and then this was a scrap sheet. It actually had a watercolor painting on the inside that I didn't particularly like. So what I did was I collaged over that and then did some of the paper dyeing over the rest of it. So here's the cover, and I try to keep everything in somewhat of a similar color scheme. So as you can see here, so here's where I collaged over. You'll see more in the back too, because this is where the painting was. Oh, yeah. One problem with that velvet ribbon is it really sheds little tiny bits pretty easily. So yeah, so this is just dyed the same way as the front. I did front and back, and I tried to do front and back for all of these sheets too this time, so that it would be more like a notebook. I mean, this is kind of a focal point, but you could certainly write below it, or, you know, whatever you wanted to do. I specifically tried to make these lighter than my normal papers, because generally I'm making them pretty dark because I like dark colors, but yeah, these are really super fun. And you know, this might not be your style. Some people don't like the grunge look, this is kind of heavy on the grunge. But I just love it. I feel like this is the method I have been looking for, maybe not all my life, but for a while I've been looking for a method like this that could produce papers that look like this. Or, you know, I didn't even know I could have papers that look like this, but I definitely like the look of them. And I will tell you, so this is all using different types of dyes. And this is just liquid watercolor. And that stuff is strong. Like, this is just like a couple drops of liquid watercolor, and it is like everywhere. And I especially like these pages. And these came out pretty bare, although you can kind of make out some stuff. And with these, you know, maybe I'll put some collage on here, add some more elements, or just write on them, or, you know, but I mean, sky's the limit to what you could do in here. You could definitely use this as a base for, you know, an art journal page or something. Start like that. It's kind of nice because this is like, you don't have the blank page, so you could use it that way. I don't think I'll use it that way because this paper is fairly thin and I don't think it could handle a lot of different media. Although I've been pretty impressed with sulfite paper. Sulfite paper is one of the things that I was introduced to by fodder school, that was sort of like a revelation as far as paper goes. But basically, I mean, how I understand it is essentially what you would use in like elementary school to do finger painting or drawing or whatever, but there's different weights to it. So this is the thinnest paper that I got off of Amazon, and then I got 2 higher weights because I wanted to play with all the different weights and see how, but it's so sturdy. It really does hold up to a lot of abuse. Even this thinner one, even though this does have a little hole in it, it's pretty amazing as to how much it'll hold up. And the sulfite paper is great as a base for collage. Like if you want to make a collage sheet of paper, cut it up, or just use that as your final collage, it really is a good base because it accepts adhesives really well. So that's nice. This is one of my favorite spreads in here. Although I do like this one too. And I do like this one that I picked for the middle. But I think that I'll probably use this for journaling. And I have not tried it yet, but supposedly the sulfite paper is good for fountain pens. Supposedly it won't bleed through, but again, I have not tried it yet, so don't take my word for that because I don't know if that will actually work. If I had gesso on here, because it seemed like there was some, yeah, that might have been gesso. And again, I'm really just showing you the papers. I'm not going to give you the method because I really do want to refer you to Liz Constable, either in fodder school or on her own website. And she has a book coming out which also details this method called Died and Gone to Heaven, but I think you can only buy it directly from her. It's not available on Amazon or anything. And this is one of those pages that I thought actually worked really, really well because this is 2 completely different pieces of paper, but it's almost like they are one piece of paper because of the way they're laid out, which I think is kind of cool. And I did do that mindfully when I went through. I did try to put papers together that would look good together. But yeah, if you're not into the grunge look, I still think that there would be an opportunity for you in this class to make something a little more muted or a little less grungy. So, but yeah, there's ways to make it less grungy looking, but there's a little something for everyone is basically what I'm trying to say. But I have just been so happy with these. And if any of you have been following me on my Instagram, I'll put a link to that below as well, although it's always linked in my profile. But I'll put a link down below to my Instagram feed, and I've posted tons of pictures of different papers that I've made. And I didn't even include, as of the date of this video, I haven't even included pictures of this particular, these particular papers. So there's, if you want to see some of the darker papers that I've made, and I did do another video flip through of some smaller sketchbooks that I put together, which are more, not so much sketchbooks, but more like lookbooks because they are mostly made out of darker papers. All right, and so then here you can see too, looks like a large part of this was collaged because I did cut this paper down from a larger size. So basically I covered up the watercolor painting underneath, which, you know, I was perfectly happy to do. It was just basically a doodle. And then I covered that up with these papers and it makes such a nice cover. And here I put a little protective piece over the stitching front and back. So you don't have to have this if you want to make something like this. I just did this so that I could keep the book closed in case I ended up chunking it up, which I might end up doing. But we'll see. All right, and then there's the back. So yeah, just look up pamphlet stitch if you're interested in how to put together a little pamphlet, yes, as the stitch name implies, um, it's really, really handy, and you could just start making your own inserts for traveler's notebooks. You could, because all you need to do is have the paper the right size for the notebook, and you could put them together with a pamphlet stitch, and it's super easy. It was kind of mind-blowing to me how easy it actually is. But that said, I will still buy inserts sometimes because I do not want to I don't want to go through the trouble of making it, but because the hardest part is cutting the paper down. So if you have, so like this I just folded sheets of paper that I had already worked with in half. And then the watercolor paper I cut down. So there wasn't a lot of cutting involved, but sometimes I find it kind of a pain to cut down all the pieces of paper. But I would say, you know, if you have a bunch of pieces of paper all the same size, regardless of what size they are, just fold them over and make them into a little pamphlet. But you can certainly do this with things for your traveler's notebooks, because it's super easy if you don't mind taking the time to cut the paper. And you could use a guillotine cutter to cut your paper. You could use scissors, you could use a knife, anything. Guillotine cutter probably makes it a little easier. I have a couple of those, but often I don't like getting them out just because they're kind of big, but and the littler one I have is not so great. But yeah, so there you go. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me down below and I'll answer when I can. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Please keep track of my future videos by subscribing to my channel, and I hope to see you next time, but in the meantime, have a great day. Thanks so much. Bye.